Yes, and it was.
So welcome everyone. I know we're going to have people joining us. We're very happy to have you. And we'll go ahead and give people a minute or two to join. My name is Alyssa Nava. I am your moderator for this session. I'm a prevention specialist at DECA. So like I said, we'll just give people a few moments and then we'll go ahead and get started.
So everybody enter this train.
Yeah, so this is the here over here.
Okay, hi everyone. I see that we still have people joining. For those of you who have recently joined, my name is Alyssa. I am the moderator for this session. And the session being, like the PowerPoint says here, reducing the hazards of lead in the home. So I want to be respectful of our time here. So I will go ahead and get us started. Let's see. So, like I said, thank you for joining us here today. I'm going to be introducing our speaker in just a moment. But first, I have a couple of reminders for everyone. So this session is currently being recorded and will be available on the conference platform 1 hour after the session ends. We want to hear from you in the chat. So feel free to ask any questions or add any comments in the chat box on the conference platform. So those chats, the page you went to be able to click on this link and get into this Zoom room has a chat function. If you're not familiar with it yet, one of the pros of using that versus the Zoom is that any messages in that chat will be saved to the platform and the recording. But as your moderator, I will be looking at that chat box and the one in Zoom. So either way, hopefully we'll be able to get your questions answered. Other than that, we definitely just want to remind everyone to remain muted unless the presenter asks otherwise, or, I come on and I encourage you guys to unmute to ask any questions. But other than that, I am very excited to introduce our speaker, Eric. Oh, I didn't even ask your last name, Eric.
Nailed it.
Nailed it. So he has worked in environmental compliance issues for 14 years, with work ranging from Wyoming and Utah through the Gulf Coast, working on infrastructure projects, public lands, and military bases. He transferred to the Kansas Department of Health and Environment Lead Hazard Prevention Program in 2021. His present work is focused on ensuring regulatory compliance from contractors working with lead-based paint and helping educate the public on the dangers of lead exposure. So I will go ahead and hand it off to you.
All right, yeah. So like I said, reducing the hazards of lead in the home is the whole point here. So just a little bit about our program. Basically our reason for existence. Want to respond to concerns about lead, the effect of health of Kansans, and most notably children, mostly because lead is, it affects children a lot more than it does adults. Adults can certainly get lead poison, but with children, it causes a lot more harm more readily and quickly. Okay, so yeah, blood lead levels as low as 3.5 micrograms per deciliter can start having harmful effects. There is no safe level of lead in the body. And blood levels at or above 70 can start having really severe consequences like coma and death. And right now, the most common cause of childhood lead poisoning is from lead paint, and it is not lead chips so much as lead dust. And so that's been a big misunderstanding with the public that we try to address and make sure that, yeah, we can do a little bit better going forward. Let's see here. Yeah, so there's basically 3 main tiers to our program, and we're separated from epidemiology that actually tracks blood level cases and stuff like that. So the first tier is education, and that includes presentations like this, but also mainly going out into paint stores, and I make sure to get posters and booklets to any paint stores and stuff like that, so that there's information publicly available about the dangers of lead. The second tier, the thing that takes the most time, is enforcement. We're trying to go out and find contractors doing work and make sure that they're following lead safe work practices if they're engaging in a project that's actually disturbing lead paint. And a lot of the times we'll try to find them on site. We'll do an on-site inspection, but the majority is actually off-site inspections. So we're looking at whether or not they kept the proper records for the work that they had done, showing that they had contained the work areas, cleaned the work areas adequately, that sort of thing. The final tier is that we handle the licensure and certification compliance. So anyone whether they're doing lead abatement work or the work under the RRP rule, which is renovation, repair, and painting, which is kind of a lesser tier of work. We make sure that those firms are licensed and that the people doing the work have the appropriate training, and that they're re-upping their certifications, getting new training, and all of that, like, on time. Okay, so very basics. What is lead? It's a naturally occurring element. It's common, very common in the Earth's crust, just a bluish gray metal. It's extremely malleable and durable. It's been put to a wide variety of uses, dating back through like ancient Roman Greece. As handy as it's been through history, it's also a neurotoxin. So it can cause permanent and irreversible health effects. Very critically for what we're talking about, within paint, it can be used as an additive. It improves the durability of the paint. It improves the corrosion resistance, which is especially important, why it's still used sometimes in painting bridges, steel bridges that, yeah, you don't want those to corrode and start falling apart. And in house paint, the reason why it was used a lot back then was for mildew and mold resistance. It's actually very durable against mildew and mold. So a lot of times you see it in not just exterior paints, but also bathrooms, kitchens, that sort of thing. Okay, so very basics of the transmission of lead into the body. Lead does not pass through the skin. It has to be either inhaled or ingested. The exception to this, hence the asterisk, is that leaded gasoline, which is tetraethyl lead, that could be absorbed to the skin. That's been banned in automotive fuel since the 1980s. And so that is no longer a main source of exposure, but it certainly was, 50 years ago. So once lead is in the bloodstream, a lot of it actually tries to accumulate within the bone tissue. Sometimes up to 95% of the lead that was absorbed initially into the bloodstream will end up deposited in the bones, and it can stay there for 30 plus years. When it's in the bloodstream, it actually has about a 30-day half-life. So it's going to filter out more of it comes out through, it's filtered out through the kidneys, comes out in the urine. It also comes out through sweat, feces, hair, and nails. Another common point or important point for this is that lead passes freely through from mother to fetus. And so a lot of times newborn infant blood lead levels can be 85 to 90% of moms at birth. And yeah, the common rule of thumb for how poisoning happens today, most children get lead poisoned by ingesting lead, either, yeah, eating paint chips, but also just lead dust, which is going to be so small as to be invisible to the naked eye. And it just collects on their hands from playing, and then they put their hands in their mouths. Or the dust is on the toys and they put the toys in their mouths, something like that. Adults are usually poisoned at work or a hobby, whether they're working in construction or they enjoy lead smelting as a hobby or do work with stained glass, something like that. And we'll get more into those type of things in a little bit. So even low levels of lead can cause severe damage in children. These low level effects, nervous system and kidney damage. The nervous system is especially susceptible to lead damage. Other organs can be damaged as well, including the kidneys, but it seems to be the nervous system that gets hit first. The effects of this: learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, decreased IQ, language, speech and behavior problems, yeah, muscle coordination, hearing damage, all that. And at high levels, you get more severe versions of what we just described, and at very high acute levels, like, yeah, there have been deaths reported. That's a pretty decent stopping point if there's questions so far. Do we have anything?
We do not. I don't see anything here.
It could be because I'm going really fast here. It always happens. All right.
And I wonder really quickly before you move on, if you could elaborate maybe a little bit about, I don't think I've ever heard necessarily about lead dust. And I wonder if you can like provide any information on, you know, where that maybe is more common or you see it like in areas of Kansas, or just kind of maybe just expand on that piece a little bit more, because I don't think I've ever really heard of that.
Okay, yeah, so lead dust, the main source right now is actually deterioration of lead paint. And so it doesn't just chip, the actual, as it weathers, it can actually create it'll start to actually chalk up, and that can fall off. A lot of the dust that falls off, it's just caused by friction. So say the inside of a window frame is actually painted and you're opening and shutting the window, or the paint on a door hinge that is being impacted. Same thing for paint behind where the kitchen chair hits the wall. All those repeated impacts or friction will actually just physically deteriorate the paint, and little bits of dust will fall off. And so it's just very, very small amounts. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I appreciate the clarification, because I think when I think about as home visitors who are going into these homes, like being able to kind of recognize potentially what that could look like, or kind of just being aware of it, that does really help. Thank you.
Yeah, because it is important to note you're not going to see the lead dust. You might see dust, but you can't tell if it's lead dust or not. And there could be lead dust present in a house that looks very, very clean. It just does not take very much at all to be potentially poisonous. All right, so if we're ready to move on, this is basically the information I could find from the CDC, basically the state of child lead exposure in Kansas. We do have older housing stock than the national average. So Yeah, over a quarter of our homes are from pre-1950. The greatest concentration of lead paint was in the 1920s and 30s. It was basically like 90% of all paints that were intended to be put in houses, house paints, had lead in them, and some of those had lead contents of up to 50% by weight. It's really, really toxic stuff. That started to curtail through the 60s and was eventually outlawed. And so, yeah, old housing stock is a big issue.
And we actually have a question in the chat, kind of going back maybe one slide.
Yeah.
Can you give examples of how much lead one has to ingest in order to have a seizure or, you know, experience those more severe health consequences, even potentially death?
Not really. There's a couple of different things that have to happen. You have the amount of lead that you ingest, you have the absorption rate, which depends on your nutrition level, how finely ground the lead was. If it's dust, it gets absorbed more readily. If it's fumes, it's actually worse. It gets absorbed extremely readily into the bloodstream. Whereas a paint chip, there's less surface area per unit mass, and so more of it's going to pass through and not enter the digestive tract in this case. And then the critical factor with determining like how much effect it's going to have, it's a concentration. It's micrograms of lead per deciliter of blood. So how much weight of lead in this volume of blood. And so an adult with a higher blood volume, that's going to be more diluted given the same dosage of lead. So there's no good answer for that. Not like a numeric answer. As a practical way to think about it, it takes very, very little. Yeah, like shake a Dorito onto a piece of paper, the dust that comes off, that would be enough.
I like that example. I think that's an example maybe all of us can really think about. And Josephine, I hope that answers your question. And I guess I would have to assume, Eric, I don't know if you could speak to it, that obviously, because it is based on volume of blood, is one important piece of it, that when we're talking about children's exposure, you know, then that obviously differs with how much they can be exposed to experience those health consequences.
Based on the insurance that she has, if she's covered, and which insurance?
Okay. Yeah, so just the lower volume of blood, yes. There also, kids actually, it seems like they actually absorb more of the lead that they ingest. Less of it passes through, and actually more of it is taken up into the bloodstream. So it's both higher absorption rate and lower volume of blood, and resulting in higher concentration.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. And I'm looking at the chat. Yes, I also like the Dorito example. I feel like that actually is like a really great visual. And understanding, you know, dust, I feel like it conceptualizes so differently. So yes, thank you so much for that.
Yeah, I can't take credit. That was a training provider. So. All right, so we're back on this graph. Okay. Yeah, so CDC data, Kansas did not report to the CDC in the asterisk years. So we really only have data from 2012 and partial data from 2018. Let's see here. We tested just under 10% of children. Of those tested, 6.1% had blood levels above 5 micrograms per deciliter. This is a stage at which there could be some long-term health effects. It's not acute. It's not going to have immediate health effects, but it is definitely worrisome. This is where intervention would start, was at the 5 microgram level. That level has actually been revised by EPA down to 3.5 micrograms per deciliter. So that's actually the new action level, but these statistics were put together using the old metrics. And so that's what we have. And you can see that in 2018, that fell down to 4.7%. Blood levels higher than 10. So yeah, only an extra 5 micrograms per deciliter. It falls from 1,400 or almost 1,500 children down to 161. So a massive fall off. And so we get a lot more people who have very mild cases of lead poisoning than even these moderate cases of lead poisoning. But comparison to national numbers, which I didn't put on the slide, so I'm just going to have to tell you about it. Nationally, an average of 16.9% of children were tested throughout all six of these years. And so that's quite a bit higher than the Kansas rates. These numbers here, the blood levels above 5, nationally, those fell from 5.2% of those tested to about 2.6% over that period. And so Kansas is actually higher in the 2 years that we could see anyway. And the blood levels above 10 nationally started at 0.58% and fell to 0.41%. And so based on that, it seems like Kansas may be lagging behind. I need to get with our epidemiology unit to get the current numbers and see what's been going on in the last few years. But that's kind of where we stand right now. Okay, so at this point, there's going to be a lot of slides just talking about ways to avoid spreading lead dust, and basically how to clean and how to separate play areas and stuff like this. So if anyone has any questions on any of these slides, just go ahead and put them in and answer them as they come. Okay, so sweeping is not ideal. It creates airborne dust. We've all seen that happen. So if it can be avoided, if you have a vacuum with a HEPA filter and you can use that instead, that would be good. I do not have that, and so I sweep. But if you do that, don't have a kid in the room. We're up high, we're sweeping up here. The lead dust is heavy. It doesn't come up to our nasal passages. It will get up to a toddler's. And so, yeah, have them outside the room, clean it up afterwards. Ideally, sweeping should be done before you mop. Because when you sweep, you're going to start getting all that dust up onto the tops of the baseboards, these other places where toddlers will later go through and they'll put their hands all over it, and then they'll put their hands in their mouths like they always do. And so ideally, that would you would only sweep before you then go through and wet clean. Wet cleaning is basically the key for any smooth surface cleaning. Ideally, you mop floors with a disposable mop, and you're changing that, say, Swiffer pad pretty regularly. If you can't use a disposable mop, that isn't practical for that family. Change the mop water out frequently, wash the mop head out, change the mop water, that sort of thing. If doing dusting, use wet wipes or wet paper towels. Dry dusting, again, it tends to spread dust rather than actually get rid of it. Big targets for dusting are windowsills and the tops of baseboards, the things that toddlers can reach. And toddlers really seem to go after windowsills. It's right at hand and tooth level, which is not good. And windows tend to accumulate lead dust. We have the lead dust that's chalking off the outside paint if the window's ever opened and that blows in. You have some of that getting trapped in by the screen or the storm window. And so especially the troughs, if it's a window that's ever opened, those troughs do have to be cleaned very frequently. The recommendation right now is to clean windowsills and other surfaces like that that are really heavily frequented by children about once a week. And yeah, washing children's hands, toys, bottles, pacifiers, always a good idea anyway. If you live in a house that was built in pre-78, yeah, it's a very good idea. All right, do we?
I had a question.
Yeah.
And when you say wash, is it like, I guess best practice, like warm water and dish soap, or, what is that? I don't know what recommendations like you guys specifically provide in terms of like toys, bottles, pacifiers, that type of thing.
When the official guidance for mopping the floors mentions using a detergent, I don't recall anything with kids' hands, toys, bottles. I would think any sort of soap detergent, just something that's going to, what's that called? The surfactant thing where it gets in the grease and pulls stuff off would help. But yeah, if soap isn't to hand and you notice that, they dropped the pacifier on the floor 8 times, yeah, just rinse it off in the water. It's better than nothing.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so we've got some more. It's just a list. And there's actually some handouts that actually go through a lot of these practices, and I'll try to point to those at the end of the presentation. I'll just switch off the PowerPoint and point to which ones of those are useful for this. So yeah, looking around the interior of the house, and this would be great if someone's doing a prenatal visit. Areas with chipping or peeling paint, if you can repair that or make it inaccessible or cover it, that'd be ideal. For example, like a couch pushed up against some windowsills, that blocks those windowsills. Those are windowsills that kid can't access anymore. The same thing could be done with chipped baseboard paint. Baseboards get hit a lot by furniture, and anywhere where that paint is flaking off, there's not just flakes, there's also going to be an accumulation of dust there. Yeah, placing a blanket or a washable rug on the floor where children play. Obviously, this is a lot easier when the kid is really young. Becomes rapidly impossible as they learn to walk. But for at least a little while, you can buy yourself some time by just putting them on something like this, and that way they're avoiding contact with the ground, which maybe isn't. Yeah, it's not perfectly clean. Keep children and their toy away from windows. Again, windows and windowsills just tend to collect a lot of dust, especially lead dust, because as the next point, when windows are repeatedly open and closed, that friction creates dust, and any wind blowing through that window will spread that dust. And so, yeah, ideally any windows in like the kid's bedroom especially should stay closed. Same with if they normally play in, say, the living room, maybe don't open that window. It'd be a good idea. And then playing outside. Most kids love digging, but exposed dirt areas near a house often are right next to the foundation, which is where a lot of this lead dust from the deterioration of the exterior paint is going to fall. And so rather than having them play in that dirt, it would be much better to have them in a sandbox. That way you're bringing in an imported material. It's not the dirt that's already at the house. And if you put that sandbox well away from the house, you're not going to get more deteriorating lead paint falling into that sand. Okay, a more general guideline for bare soil, cover it however you can. Whether you're planting grass in, putting in sod, put in some bushes and then some wood chips or gravel, some sort of a mulch. Just create a separation between the surface of the soil and where the kid's going to be walking on, or pushing the trucks and everything else. Just a containment strategy. Yeah, having people remove shoes as they come into the house, having a mat where people wipe their feet. It's very helpful, not just for not tracking in stuff and making messes, but even, yeah, just the small amounts of dirt and dust that, yeah, can bring lead into what was just cleaned like a minute ago. Right now, drinking water is actually not a very common source of lead poisoning. It's the source that's gotten the most attention recently because of Flint. But even in areas that have lead pipes, a municipality that's running its water system correctly should not be leaching lead into the water. But it doesn't hurt. You can let the water run for a bit before using. If you run the water over your fingers, you'll notice a temperature change after a few seconds. That first few seconds of water is what was in your pipes inside the home. That next change in water temperature, that's the service line running from the water main under your lawn to your actual housing pipes. Right now, there's the initiative to replace all service lines with non-leaded pipes. There is not an initiative to replace, a national initiative anyway, to replace lead pipes in people's homes. And a lot of municipalities have already gone through and replaced those. It's the actual house pipes that remain. Yeah, if someone's really worried that that they do have lead pipes, it can often be told just visually, and so any like home inspector should be able to identify that if they have exposed pipe work in the basement or something like that. Okay, and finally, diet is actually really important. Nutrient-rich foods, especially those with iron, calcium, and zinc, will reduce the level of lead absorbed. It's also pretty good for other heavy metals. So, then I had some notes about gardens because this doesn't fit on the slide, and it made the most sense here. Ideally, you would test your garden soil. You would have to check with your ag extensions. Some will do heavy metals, but a lot just do nitrogen, potassium, and the other one. I forgot my basic nutrients. Yeah, EPA doesn't recommend gardening or allowing play on bare soil with greater than 400 parts per million of lead. If testing isn't available in your area, or just the homeowner doesn't want to do it or can't afford it, whatever, and they still want to garden, the basic rule is to place it away from the home. You don't want it anywhere near that drip line coming down from the gutter line down. Any bare soil, if you can cover that with mulch, and you want to thoroughly wash any produce that comes up. So the main issue with gardening in soils that have lead is actually not the crops taking up lead into the fruits or anything else. It's actually splash up from the soil when it gets hit by rain. And so if you can mulch and prevent that, it actually keeps a lot of the lead off. But still, you're going to want to make sure that you do a lot of washing. And they recommended considering not doing any root crops or leafy vegetation like lettuces or stuff like that. Those are just much more difficult to wash off all of the lead contaminated soil. And so, yeah, you can still do all of the squash, the tomatoes, the peppers, all the really fun stuff anyway. And if you can trellis those to keep them further off the ground, that helps even further. Okay, do we have any questions so far? Those are the big ones. Then we start getting into some small things.
I don't see any questions, but I think so many internal thoughts I'm like processing, and this is a really new subject to me. So I appreciate, I know you're saying it's a list, but I know I definitely appreciate it.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm going a mile a minute here, so I'm hoping everyone's not lost. All right. So other sources, I have to put in car keys because I know I played with car keys as a child a ton. So the zinc and brass can contain lead. Modern brass is around 1.5 to 2.5% lead, and older brass can have higher concentrations. So yeah, we can't let kids play with car keys. I did not know that before I started this. There are folk remedies. One of the handouts at the end of this has a full list of these, including like their countries of origin, that sort of thing. There's folk remedies from the Indian subcontinent, Middle East, West Asian. The most common one in this area is probably Azarcon. That's primarily out of Mexico and some other Central American countries. But yeah, some Azarcon, it's generally for stomach aches, I believe. And some of that can actually be like 20, 30% lead by weight. It's not a good idea to eat it. Ceramics, modern ceramics made in the US will not have lead in the glazes. Old ceramics from the US sometimes do, and modern ceramics from some other countries also do. And there, to my knowledge, is not a comprehensive list on which foreign ceramics are good and which foreign ceramics are not. They're generally kind of viewed with suspicion. You can still have them around, but yeah, you don't want to be eating off them very commonly, and you don't want to put acidic foods on those and then consume them. So yeah, the cut up tomatoes and the coffee mugs and that sort of thing are probably not things you want to use. Imported cosmetics, candies, and jewelry. We've only recently gone down to 1.5 to 2.5% lead in brass. That's not the case in other places. And so, yeah, brass, some pewter even is still, most pewter now is non-leaded, but in some other places it might not be. And finally, food dyes. A lot of food dyes are labeled non-toxic, but they are not actually food grade, which is really confusing considering they're called food dyes. So yeah, don't trust marketing, basically. There was one of the horror stories that they've had in one of our classes. It was a yellow food dye that they saw on a birthday cake. And it was a powdered food dye, and they tested that, and it was 290,000 parts per million lead, so 29% lead.
Wow.
So yeah, it's ridiculous. Yeah, okay, so we're actually getting into stuff where I would have a direct role in actually helping with any of this stuff. If doing renovations or repair on a home that you own, making sure that a licensed firm is doing the work and someone on that team is actually a certified renovator. They should be able to produce their firm licenses and certification showing that they have had training and they're up to date. If they can't do that, find someone who can. The KDHE website, there's a spot where you can find a list of contractors. It's an Excel file. You can filter that by area and pull out which contractors are licensed to work with lead in that area. If that doesn't work, people can call our office and we will assist. And yeah, if someone's doing their own work, going to our website is a good first step. We know a lot of people, they're not going to hire a contractor for things if they feel like they can do it themselves. And yeah, I've done homework myself too, like, yeah, including before I knew anything about this stuff. And so yeah, getting some information from our website that can be a good start. If you're doing anything major, yeah, we can hook people up with a training course. It's going to cost some money. It's going to take 8 hours. It's a one-day course. But yeah, it teaches people how to contain the work areas, make sure that they aren't tracking out of the work areas, keep that containment very solid and secure, and then how to clean up afterwards to make sure that, yeah, any of the dust that's generated doesn't, well, infect them and doesn't remain behind after they're done with the job and let everyone else back in. If whether someone's a tenant or a homeowner, if they're having work done in the house by a contractor, that contractor should be giving them a copy of this book. It might be black and white, but same content. This is required before any work starts. If someone is having work done and it's disturbing lead paint and they did not get this book, that's the first sign that something is going on that's not right. And so, yeah, it's time to have a talk with that contractor and ask, why didn't I get information about this? And if they don't have good answers, we have a complaint form. We'll get to that in a little bit. This same information has to be provided to all the families if a daycare center or other like childcare facility is being renovated.
And Eric, we did have a question in the chat, and you might be getting to this, but wondering about, I guess specifically, is KDHE aware of any grants that are available to help families get homes either tested, treated, or help with, I guess not necessarily renovations, but like removal of lead? I think I can assume like with home visitors, like the families are typically working with, they might have like those financial barriers. And so just curious if you're aware of any, I guess either state or national resources.
Right now, I'm not aware of any of the like bigger initiatives where you're talking about removal of lead. That is lead abatement rather than what I mostly deal with, which is the renovation, repair, and painting rule. The way to think about it is with renovation, repair, and painting work, a contractor is doing work on a home, and that the training that they get tells them how to not make that situation worse while they're there. Abatement, where you're actually going in and making sure that you remove all the lead out of an area. It's, I think workers, well, it's several days anyway. It's much more in depth. The cleaning verifications are more stringent, that sort of thing. There's some abatement work going on in the state. It tends to be concentrated in areas that are that have funding through HUD. And
okay, that's really helpful. Another question we had here, do tobacco products have lead? And I guess whether or not if you're aware of any, I guess, secondhand smoking is a pretty common health concern, but yeah. I guess if you're aware of any connection to lead in that, from that source.
I have not heard anything about lead in tobacco products. I suppose it's a possibility, but I really don't know.
Yeah, thank you.
I would say, like, if someone's smoking in the house, it's harder to clean because that tar buildup, like you can't clean dust off of that very well. And so it could have an indirect effect, I would think, but I don't know about direct effects.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so just a little bit more about the renovation, repair, and painting rule, just because that's what most contractors are operating under. Again, it focuses on containing the work area and cleaning the work area so that any lead dust generated by the job doesn't infect the family or the workers, right? But there are exceptions to the RRP rule. If someone's doing work that disturbs less than 6 square feet of the interior of the house or less than 20 exterior square feet, they don't actually have to follow the RRP rule. As a homeowner, you could probably request that the contractor do that anyway if you're concerned, and it'll add some money, it'll add some time because they aren't allowed to use some practices that they would otherwise, and there's more plastic, more cleanup, that sort of thing. So it's going to add some labor hours. But if a family does have those resources, it can be worth it. So what this means is that some small projects are going to be unregulated, and tenants especially might not have much control over whether RRP is followed on small projects. For that reason, and just because no contractor is perfect, even the ones that try really hard and are genuinely doing good work, we advise that people do clean following renovations and repairs, even if it's minor. Even if you just you hang a picture, you're going to put a few holes into the wall. You're going to go through all the paint layers, and some of that's going to fall down. If you can vacuum up right after you do it, that sort of thing. Just the prevention of dust it's an ongoing process, and it's the small things that add up. And so, yeah, just being sure to clean after renovations, even after the contractor's gone through and you've seen them clean. Go ahead and do another pass over anyway. While all that furniture is out of the way, might as well. Okay, so from here on, we're going to talk some about what to do, or how what happens when someone actually does get lead poisoning. We're going to go into the basics of how elevated blood lead level, or EBL, cases are processed through. And this is a side that I don't have anything to do with. And so I'm giving information that is actually handled by the epidemiology unit in conjunction with local healthcare, or local health departments. All right, so first of all, people with elevated blood lead levels, many do not have any symptoms. The only way to know is a blood lead test. Some of the symptoms that you may not see are anemia, constipation, fatigue, headache, joint pain, lack of appetite, muscular weakness, numbness, tingling of extremities, seizures, stomach ache, vomiting, mental issues like difficulty concentrating, depression, forgetfulness, irritability, nervousness. You can tell I wrote all this down. A lot of times people will mistake symptoms for cold or flu symptoms and think, oh, it's just stomach ache, it'll go away. Symptoms can come and go. They are not persistent necessarily. And yeah, a lot of people don't have any outward symptoms at all. When it comes to blood lead level testing, a lot of times capillary tests are used as screening tools. There is a risk that someone has a little bit of lead dust on their finger and that gets picked up. And so the general guidance is that capillary tests get confirmed with a venous test some amount of time later, depending on how high the test was. Okay, so this is going over like the basic recommendations for whether a child should get tested for blood lead level. First of all, children who get Medicaid assistance are automatically going to get tested for blood lead level. It happens twice during early childhood. I was trying to look up when exactly that happened. I couldn't find it. So sometime. So what we're talking about here is it would be voluntary for the family to do it, but it could be recommended by the visiting professional. So any child that lives in a pre-1978 home, there's a qualification. Like that's considered reasonably high risk. Anything pre-1950 is considered high risk for having elevated blood lead level, and they recommend getting tested. It would also count if they were frequently visiting a pre-1978 home. So even if the parents live in a new house, if the kids are at grandma's, once a week, and grandma lives in a 1920s farmhouse, well, yeah, should probably test the kid. Any visits to a building that had ongoing renovations, and so the kid could have inhaled a large amount of dust, that's a good reason to go ahead and get a blood lead level test. If the child is exhibiting the pica behaviors, eating paint, dirt especially, that would be an issue. And then if the adults that the child is in frequent contact with are themselves at high risk for lead poisoning, they can also get a lot of that dust on their clothes and then give it to the child. And so, yeah, anyone who works in construction, battery manufacturer, automotive repair, shooting, if they do a lot of shooting or reloading as a hobby, or they work in a shooting range, valve and pipe fitting, anyone who works in a foundry, or anyone who does any lead smelting, like if they make fishing weights, refinishing furniture, radiator repair actually has a fair bit of lead exposure, pottery making, welding. And yeah, adult in contact would definitely cover anything like prenatal. That's very in contact. That placental barrier does not stop lead. And I didn't find anything directly related to breastfeeding, but I would think that that would that would be a definite avenue to pass lead on to the child as well. And, okay. We have many questions so far.
So we have a few follow-up questions, specifically about like possible exposures. So we had one question asking about old popcorn ceilings and any risk there in terms of removing that and exposure.
Yeah, so sometimes those can contain lead. Yeah, I would think that would be more of a problem as the child is getting older, or if they share a room with an older child, because it gets to pick things.
Or so yeah, I think of, at home renovations, kind of DIY, removing the ceiling yourself is something that I guess, obviously, like you're saying, there are levels of just awareness and education.
Yeah. That would be a job that should be done under the RRP rules. And so, yeah, it's disturbing a surface that does contain lead. So they should be following RRP when they do that. I actually pulled up the Zoom chat and someone mentioned that, yeah, Kristen Fritz, thank you. The testing for, Medicaid recipients is at 12 and 24 months. So thank you. And yeah, pregnant women should be able to pass lead to the baby. Yeah. Let's see here. Where's that? Okay, so these are the basics for the elevated blood level process. One of the handouts is attached to the presentation, or as a file, and so people can pick that up. The clinical blood lead management fact sheet has the up-to-date guidance from our epidemiology unit on exactly how this should be done. And that's the one that's given out to the local healthcare workers when an EBL case is identified. And so that gets much more in depth, and but let's see here. Yeah, basically, as you can see here, it's dependent on the amount of lead poisoning. There's a follow-up test, and Part C services actually there's automatic referral for Part C services if the second test is at the same level or higher than the first test, because that shows that there's something chronic going on and that there could be long-term effects. So if someone isn't already getting some sort of services, that could be a way to get them free services. Oops, clicked on the wrong thing here. Oh, yeah, let me go back. Let's see. The education that's talked about, that's basically giving information like has been given here. Cleaning, how to make sure that your renovations aren't causing problems, that sort of thing. EBL investigation is actually a very in-depth. It's going to go through with a, I forget the name of the gun. They're going to determine whether there's lead in any of the paint surfaces all around the house. They're going to go through, they're going to test the kids' toys. They're going to take dust samples from the floors, all sorts of things. They're going to try to figure out what the source of this lead is. So that usually kicks in under the older version of the guidance around the 15 micrograms per deciliter level. And then only above 45 micrograms a deciliter do they recommend chelation treatment. Okay, and this just goes through some of the qualifications for EBL investigators. We get a lot of questions from local health departments about becoming EBL investigators. And the main point is that the EBL investigator comes up through the risk assessment side. And so this is a person who has, as it says down here, work in residential construction, renovation and repair, and then certification as industrial hygienist, professional engineer, architect, environmental scientist, or a safety professional. They're trying to get at people who can look behind like the basic damage that you can see with a naked eye and say, oh, well, that wall is actually deteriorating because of water damage because of the roof. And so get at the root cause of the structural issue. And so that's actually why that's a little bit harder to get than people realize. Finally, that's my last slide. That took longer than I thought. Anyone hang on till the end?
Yes, no, I think that was very informative, and I know I appreciate it. If anyone has any questions, you can definitely unmute to ask any or put them in the chat. I don't see anything specific that has come in, but I think really just off the top of my head, you know, I did in the chat, and I can re-put it in there. I did link to the KDHE, the residential lead hazard prevention main page. I have that in there. So I think that, again, like you're saying, that's a great resource, especially to share with families or to be able to look for other resources you guys can share. And then like Eric was saying, we did add many resources to the files piece of this on the platform that you can view as well. And then I see there is one question here about food dyes. Do you have any insight into like any ingredients to look out for with food labels, or kind of, I guess, more information on that piece?
I really don't. I wish I did. Yeah, I don't. I think a label that says food grade gets you a lot further than just something that says non-toxic. Because for some reason they're allowed to call it non-toxic even though it contains a neurotoxin. I don't know why. Yeah.
Another question here is, would you recommend children with a developmental delay get a lead test?
Yes, actually. The modern version of that, let me pull it up here. Nope, wrong thing. Lead risk questionnaire. Let me pull it over here. Is that showing up there?
Yes, it is.
Okay, good. Yeah, so the current version of this, I believe it actually has that in here. part of this is cut off. Nope, it doesn't. Darn. But yeah, if that can be identified as the cause, and that might be able to help with treatment and at least keep the problem from getting worse if you can arrest further lead poisoning from happening.
Yeah, and I think it kind of goes back to your point where if as a home visitor, you're noticing anyone in the family with consistent symptoms, and like you're saying, you know, you can probably kind of tell older homes at this point, and you have a suspicion, it probably is just best practice as a home visitor to go ahead and, you know, have testing done or look into that avenue for the family for sure. But this lead risk questionnaire is in the files that are uploaded to the platform as well.
Right, and all the there's a copy of the PowerPoint, and that's the only one that comes from me. Everything else comes from the epidemiology unit. And they gave me all this early this morning so that I could pass it on. So all this is the most up-to-date current versions.
Awesome. Okay, well, I see we're right at 4:30. So thank you everyone for joining us today. And we hope to see you back here tomorrow. And I know, I'm sure Eric would be happy to stay a few minutes if anyone has any questions or would like to unmute to ask anything. But thank you guys for joining us today. I will go ahead and stop the recording at this point.